So the goal of this video is to get you started with your storyboard. Now, let me say I'll be throwing out a lot of questions and scenarios at you. Hopefully they make sense, and hopefully you can figure some of this stuff out on your own. But if you can't yet at this point, don't be discouraged. The idea is that if you follow along and do all of the steps that I do, even if you maybe couldn't have figured out how to do them on your own, you'll be able to do what I do and just substitute my work, my demos, with your work or your drawings or your characters, and you should end up with a functional storyboard. So what size do we start storyboarding at? Like, so far we just went into the program and worked in pixels, just punched in some numbers, maybe not knowing what all that meant. And what about ratio? Like you've heard that TVs are 16:9 aspect ratio. What does all that mean? So let's start with the ratio. And let's say that you wanted your animation to be idealized for a widescreen TV. And if you don't have a format in mind already, I suggest that you do this same format that I'm about to show, and then just follow exactly along. So your largest dimension in this project is required to be 800 pixels. So if you're going wide, that would mean it would be 800 pixels wide. So if you know that, how do you figure out how tall it is if you're going for a 16:9 aspect ratio? So see if you can figure this out. Just go ahead and pause the video, and right now I will show you the solution in Illustrator. So it's basically algebra, yuck, right? But here's one of those cases where your algebra teacher was right. You may need these story problems someday in your life. Well, here you go. Okay, so basically what you're saying here is that 16:9, or 16/9, equals 800 over some other number, what is the variable, what we're trying to figure out. And we line up the two biggest numbers together. In other words, we know that 800 is going to be our biggest number, so we align it up across from the 16, not across from the 9. Then you do the cross multiplication. So 16x will equal 9 times 800. Just like that. Then you actually multiply 9 times 800. Looks something like that. Then you solve for x by dividing both sides by 16, and then you have x equals 7,200 divided by 16. Punch that into your calculator and you come up with that x equals 450. So in other words, what you're saying is that 16:9 is the same as 800 to 450. Now, even if you couldn't figure out how to get that, what the important thing to understand is that a ratio is just like the combination of the width and the height of something. So it's pretty easy to understand if you're talking about a square. If it's 2 inches by 2 inches, and let's say you create a masterpiece in 2 inches by 2 inches, and someone says, I love that, I want that on my wall. That one's pretty easy to figure out, right? Because it's square, and if they say, okay, my wall is 8 feet tall, how wide should it be? Well, the same, right? 8 by 8, because that's square. But what if you started out with the masterpiece at 16:9 and the wall was 3 feet wide that they wanted you to put this on? You would just go, punch in, instead of 800 here, you'd punch in 3 and you'd come up with the other dimension for it. So, and you can always confirm with division. So you would take 16 divided by 9, write that number down, and it'll be the same, if you did this correctly, which we did, I checked it, it'll be the same as the answer to 800 divided by 450. So as I said, I'm going to show you how to do a digital storyboard, just meaning it's going to be still. It's just, instead of being printed and mounted on a board, it's going to be something that you could share a JPEG with someone, or you could go to their office and shine it up on their big screen. And I'm going to show you start to finish using Adobe Animate, because I don't want to confuse the issue with introducing another program like Photoshop or Illustrator to do the work in. So what we're going to do is set up an animate file with a stage size that's exactly equal to what we just said. We'll figure out later how to transfer this to print, for example, just in case you did want to print it out. But if you did want to just kind of have an idea right now, a rough rule of thumb is just take your pixel dimensions, and if you need just a decent quality printout, you could divide that by 150, and if you needed a super high quality printout, divide it by 300. So just as an example here, let's take 800 and we'll divide it by 150. And this would be how big each frame could come out with a relatively good print quality. And then since 300 is double the quality, that number should be exactly half, so 2.66 whatever. Which would mean that you could print out each one of your frames at about 2 2/3 of an inch, and you'd have super extremely good quality, and then you could mount those on a black board, take them into your client and say, how does this look? Are we ready to go with the animation? But we create a file in Animate that is 800 pixels wide by 450 pixels tall. That's my stage right there. And now literally we could just simply draw what is going to happen on each frame of our storyboard, one frame after another in this program, and export it. And then take each one of those exports, say there's 20 of them, put them all together on a storyboard, and we're good. But not only am I going to show you that, but I also want to show you a technique that a lot of people do in their animations. And so I want to show you that you can do this in the storyboard as well and start to learn a little bit about this technique. But also, it gives you the chance to get more bang for the buck, or to kill two birds with one stone. In other words, what you're going to do is, by following along with this, you'll be starting to create assets, not just for your storyboard, but for your actual animation when you're getting around to animating. And all the technique is really just overlapping pieces that move together. And I'll show you a quick example in a second. But I just want you to know that even if you are going to draw, your other choices would be to draw your storyboard by hand and then scan the images, or to draw them in another sketching program and then export those images. Even if you decide to do that, which will probably end up being a little bit more work anyway, but I do want to leave that option open to you. This, what I'm about to show you, is considered required learning for this class. So if it doesn't apply to you right now, just sit back, relax, watch this part, and then eventually I'll get to the point that applies to everybody as to how to export your scans or your exports from another program, and then stitch those together to make the big board, the actual storyboard with all the little frames. So right now what we're doing is creating the frames. And so before I actually create something, let me just show you what I mean by overlapping. So if we have a character's upper arm, so this would be the shoulder where I'm at right now, coming down to the elbow, and I won't even fill that in. If we create the forearm part of the arm, what we would do is, instead of just starting here in drawing, we want it to overlap. And we want to think of that as there being like a pin here, like right about there, that, oops, let me just draw my pin in here. So if you imagine a little pivot point there, these could move around and not have you see through them, or for there to be any awkward gaps there. So now let's actually create some pieces that we could use for a storyboard. So in my example, I'm going to show a person that